Okay, hello everyone, and this is a part 2 on the T-55 AMS from the Polish Army. As promised, we were going to do one basically talking about the tank, explaining it a little bit, and we're going to also do the inside tour today. And my friend Scott, he's going to do it for you.
How's it going? I'm Scott here with Battlefield Vegas. This is our latest addition to our armored collection. As Dimitri stated, T-55 AMS Polish Army. We're going to do what we call a walk around, so we'll do an in-depth look at various different components on the tank, and then we'll go inside and we'll show you inside. So moving along real quick, obviously with the markings, we discovered early on that this is a T-55 AMS, not a T-55 AM2. AMS, the S is the pre-designated for Sapper, in other words, engineering variant of this tank. It's still very much a main battle tank. However, the engineering units would have implements like a mining plow or a dozer blade, and this tank at one time was fitted out with that. Which leads us to our markings. These markings are actually the original markings we found on this tank during paint prep. So it's been, we did our research and we discovered that pre-Soviet Union, before the Soviet Union collapsed, the Polish military had the standardized green T-55, T-62, and their numbers during the Cold War era was only a 3-digit number. After the Soviet Union fell during the 90s, Poland did a big reform of their military, and they introduced what you see here, the tricolor camouflage pattern, and then they introduced 4 digits onto their vehicles. So you see we have here the X is the pre-designator for the Polish engineering units. So X673 means an engineering tank. So as we begin to move around the tank and look at the various different components specific to T-55, those of you that are familiar with these tanks, T-55, T-62 is what we're familiar here with at Battlefield. Very similar tanks, some subtle differences, some major, but for the most part, in terms of operation and running, T-55, T-62 is almost identical. So moving through to some of your upgrades, the particular track that we have here on this T-55 is the updated, modernized version of the series of tanks. The older style of track, as opposed to a pin with bolts on either side, had a free-floating pin. And those of you that are familiar with the older style of track, which we will feature in some of our T-62 videos, the free-floating pin had a head only on the inside. The pin would walk itself out from the center of the track, and towards the rear of the tank, on the inside on the hull, there was a raised piece of metal called a pin hammer. Every time the track would pass over the pin hammer would actually smash the pin back into the center of the track. Very unique sound to running a T-55 with the older style track. However, the upgrade to that version here was the newer style track. It has a much more aggressive track profile, providing obviously more traction, more grab on the ground, and a bolt either side, and in the middle of the track pin is actually surrounded by a rubber bushing. So in terms of mechanical engineering, the older style of the track with the pin is metal on metal, so it is more durable. However, it's prone to wear itself out down to the metal core, needing a full replacement of both the track and the pin. The upgraded style with the rubber bushings, you have less metal to metal wear. You just wear out the rubber bushings, and then for a refurbishment you can press new rubber bushings in, as opposed to replacing the whole track and pin. Here we have what's called the idler wheel. This is also the track adjuster. To adjust this and set your track tension, there's an adjustment nut up on the top side there. You would lift up this panel here, and you literally just a huge breaker bar, and it runs off a worm gear. So you tighten a worm gear, it will actually spin this wheel up and outwards towards the front of the tank, thus tightening the track. All track does stretch with time, so before it's worn out completely and not serviceable, it will stretch, and then you just adjust to match the stretch that you get. Moving further along down the side of the tank, standard rubber road wheels. We have our side skirts. And specific to, as far as I know, only Polish tanks have the side skirts mounted up the top here, shooting out of the side as well. Walking down along, up here we have our external fuel cells and also external oil cell tank. The reserve oil cell has been relocated from the top of the exhaust around to the side here, and these engines, the V55, W55 engine, they consume a lot of oil. So the crews, in addition to reserve external fuel cell, they have reserve oil on hand to feed back into the engine. Smoke launchers there. Okay, so moving around to the rear of the tank now, this is what you call the sprocket wheel. This is the wheel that actually provides drive to the track. The steering system on T-55, T-62 is what we call a gear reduction. Unfortunately, I can't show you because the steering hub is buried deep inside the engine bay underneath the transmission and the radiator. But what happens is when you're driving this tank with your steering components, it's not a conventional pull the steering lever, engage or brake. What happens is T-55, T-62 and probably other Russian tanks that I know of, the steering lever has 3 positions, which we'll show you from inside the driver's hull. But position 0 is forward, nothing's engaged. When you pull the steering lever into position 1, you're creating a gear reduction. So behind this sprocket here on the inside is a steering hub with a series of clutches in them, and it's basically a planetary gear system or sunray gear system. And when you go into steering position 1, you are engaging a reduction of a gear. So you're not braking one side of the track, you're just gear reducing one side of the vehicle to go slower. This is, in my opinion, it's a good setup because you have your gear ratios from the gearbox transmission, gear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. But you can, no matter what gear you're in, you can put both steering laterals into position 1 and halve your gear ratio instantly without engaging clutches or changing gears. Once you go into gear position 2, at that point the planetary gear again disengages, and then at that point it provides drive all the way out to the track at full power again, at which point there you are engaging a conventional style brake system. So that is a rough explanation of how the steering works on these this type of Russian tank. Okay, so on this tank we have the reserve fuel cell system. These drums are not original to this tank. We haven't yet been able to locate original fuel cell drums, but originally these drums would be plumbed directly into the fuel system. So the fuel system on this tank, you have your external fuel cells along the sponson there. We have reserve fuel at the back. You have 3 fuel cells inside the tank. All of these fuel cells gravity feed into they feed into a primer tank. So there's various levers and switches where you can select which fuel cell that you're going to draw from. But typically these cells up here are the most vulnerable to small arms fire and leaks. So I would imagine they would use these fuel cells initially first up to drive those longer distances to get towards the front. Moving down underneath here, this is what you call the final drive. So inside here is all of your gearing, where power is transferred from the engine through the transfer case, through the transmission, through the steering hubs and into the final drives. This is basically a gear bath, non-pressurized, but when you're going to do your pre-checks, we crack this bolt here and we put a dipstick down. We're checking the level of the oil in this section here, and this is just a big bath for the gears inside here. So that is called the final drive. Okay, so here we have, this is a reproduction that we made here at the shop, but some of you might ask what this fluorescent black sign is. From the research that I have done, this was a Nato Warsaw standard post-Cold War for armored vehicles to be allowed to drive on the road. They had to have this fluorescent black triangle on the tank. On this tank, there's one at the rear and there's one at the front. If any of you have any suggestions as to what else this might purpose this might serve, please comment below, and we can further update our information that we have. Okay, so now we're on the top deck, or the engine bay of the T-55, and we'll just talk about the various engine components quickly. So it is a V55 diesel engine, Soviet built. Outside of Russia, from what I know, Czechoslovakia and Poland were licensed to build the majority of the parts and the tank itself. This engine, this whole tank was built in Poland. So looking down here, we have made some modifications to the original. The original setup of T-55 had what is called an oil bath air filter. And as you're looking at it right now, you wouldn't be able to see any of these components. The oil bath air filter is a big box that sits right here. And it's a series of screens that actually have oil, and it has exhaust back pressure that aids in filtering impurities out of the air before it enters the engine. We're not entering into combat. We don't do long drives here, so for ease of maintenance and access here at Battlefield, we've just added standard air filters and deleted the exhaust back pressure. So looking at things as you see it, right here we have the engine. The engine in these tanks is actually mounted sideways, and this is in order to somewhat shorten the length of the tank. But unfortunately, the way that this is designed, we cannot do what's called a pack lift. A pack lift is referred to in the armored world, meaning when you reference a pack lift, you pull, you open the back deck, you hook on, you disconnect, you can pull the engine, the radiator, the transmission, everything comes out in what we call a pack, and you can set the whole lot outside the tank. With these era of Russian tanks, everything is individually compartmentalized, so what that means is you pull individual components out of the tank. So we have transmission and radiator under this section, which we'll go through in a moment. But over here, if you come down close again, right down there you have main engine drive with its coupler. This section here is what's called the transfer case. Then moving over here, we have the electric starter mounted on top, your clutch mounted down under here. So the transfer case, the point of that is drive comes out of the engine, and then it goes into this gearbox here with a series of gears, and it drives the power back out this side into the clutch, which goes into the side of the transmission. The electric starter, you have your Bendix up here and your motor down here. All that does is throw your gear out onto the flywheel of the clutch. So that's how we start the engine with electric. Whether you're in neutral, forward, reverse, it does not matter. These three components are always spinning if the tank is on. We have our secondary oil filter over here. We have another oil filter down underneath the engine, which we would not be able to see today. Down underneath your coupler for the transfer and the drive there, you can see this motor right here. That is the pump for your smoke generator. So that smoke generator runs through the firewall, and your primer tank is right behind this inside the crew compartment. It gravity feeds into that pump right there. When you engage your smoke generator, that provides a smoke screen. It pumps fuel up this line right here. It comes out up here at the top.
So the pump for the smoke generator,
yes,
is that right down here?
Correct.
So
yeah.
This right here, right?
Yeah, that is the electric section of the pump. And if you can pan up here, I'm not sure if you can see it or not.
I see the line, yeah.
It pumps over here to this section here, and that pumps fuel either side directly into the exhaust manifold. So once the engine is up to temperature and you have good heat going through your exhaust, that pump electrically pumps fuel straight into the exhaust manifold and creates an immense amount of white smoke. Okay, so one feature I really enjoyed about the Russian vehicles is everything is color coded. So if we look down here, for ease of fixing, yellow is fuel, anything with diesel or fuel in it. Over here we have red, Red is the preloaded fire suppression system for the engine bay. Then we have blue, which is air. So this tank actually has an air compressor with an air start system. Then down underneath here we have green. Green is coolant and water. So everything being color coded definitely makes things easier to fix, repair and work on. Which I really like that feature. So right here we have our radiator. You check your fluid level right through here, the radiator cap. That can be done with the deck closed. The radiator just folds up out of the way, locks back, and then you have access to the rear half of the engine.
Let's go.
Okay, so moving to the rear half of the engine bay, going through some of our components here. We have our circulating air fan. It has air intake, air extraction after it passes through the radiator screen here. That fan is driven off the drive shaft, so going back towards where we just were at the front end, underneath here you have your clutch. This unit here is the transmission. It has a gear system, a small gearbox here that always has drive. That provides constant drive to your air compressor and then constant drive to your air fan. So obviously one of the advantages about a mechanical fan system is, in my opinion, much more reliable than an electric fan system, and you have immense amount of power, and the speed of the fan increases or decreases with the revs of the engine. So when your engine is working harder, your fan is working harder. They're matched together with revolutions. Moving back down here into the engine bay, as you can see, again we have our color coded lines: blue, green, red. So we'll start with the air compressor. So we have our small air compressor here. This air compressor has the ability to generate an immense amount of PSI. Your air compressor, that's your intake valve that runs through your air filter. So the air is filtered, it comes through, it comes back out again. Over here you have your regulator and your water trap, and then it charges air that runs through this line to the front of the tank, and it fills air bottles, which we'll talk about, and we'll talk about how the air start system works at another time. This is what we have here, what we call the steering hub. We talked about how this works earlier, but basically on the other side, rearward side of this, which you can't see, you have your clutch system inside this, and then inside this hub is your planetary gears. So when you go into your gear reduction, only the outside section of the hub is working. The midsection here is free floating. Then when you go into position 2 and you actually brake, you have direct drive going through, and these big shoes engage the brake when you're in steering lever position 2. These shoes here also engage what we call the service brake, which is the foot brake that most of you will know of.
Ready?
So moving to the other side of the engine bay, right here you have your gear selectors. So when you put your foot on the clutch and you go into gear, you're actually moving these sections here. And then we have our Polish figures there. So if you're going to do a full rebuild with all your linkages disconnected, you know that with all of these gears preset into 0, that's neutral of the tank. So then you can see 0, this kicks over here, this is reverse, gear 1. Then you move up to this one here, you have neutral, I believe 4 and 5, and then over here is the remainder of the gears, again neutral, and then your other 2 gears right there. Moving right here, you have your oil cooler, and then interestingly this engine is what we call a dry sump engine. So if you were to drain oil on this engine, you have to drain from 2 places. So we actually have a reserve oil holding tank, which is what this is right here. And the majority of our oil is kept in this tank here, and that feeds underneath the transmission into the engine bay. So at that point you have to drain from the reserve tank and then the bottom of the engine bay as well. But for an engine that size, there really is not very much oil in the engine itself. Once you reach pressure, everything's already flowing and moving. When you go back to switch off, most of the oil is sitting back here in this reserve tank. Okay, so here we have a top view of the engine. Basically, these sections you see running along here is your air intake. These lines are your fuel. Then you have a mechanically driven fuel pump, which is what you see running all the way along here. Again, being mechanical, in my opinion, a little bit more reliable. You have your secondary fuel filter right there, and more importantly, if you can get down in there through that, that is the assembly for the receiving end of your air start system. So when we engage our air start, air is a tremendous amount of air pressure is forced to that point, and then each one of those lines runs into each cylinder, and the air gets into the cylinder, and then that's what actually turns over the engine. So that the air start is quite an impressive feature. And then obviously your throttle linkages is running along the side of the fuel pump right there.
This is it, right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
That's really about it. Okay, so moving around to the front side of the tank now, particularly with the gun. This is a D10 100mm rifled gun, developed during late World War II and slightly modified, and then eventually became the mainstay gun for Russian main battle tanks in the 50s. So moving on, parts of the gun. So this section of pipework all along here, like a tin, is what we call a thermal jacket or barrel jacket. What this does, it aids in preventing changes in your zero for your main armament. So for example, during lying wait in ambush, when you're in an area for a long time, or when you are firing several rounds in a one serial, the barrel will begin to heat up. And if you're outside in the elements and, for example, you have a cold breeze hit one side of the barrel, it can actually cause the barrel to fluctuate and change its structure, and it can throw out your main armament zero quite substantially. So again, what this does, it helps you to prevent that happening. Okay, so now we're down at the end of the gun, the muzzle, and this section here is what's called a fume extractor or bore evacuator, depending on which country you're referring to with their terminology. What this does is, this is a more modern update to modern tanks, and the idea of this section is to inhibit poisonous gases that might be lingering from your round, from your burnt powder, moving back into the tank to harm the crew. So in addition to vent fans inside the tank, what this does is around the actual barrel itself, there's a series of pinholes drilled that are angled, aiming out towards the front of the gun. And what happens is, as the round passes through this section, before the projectile actually leaves the barrel, there is a seal between the chamber and the muzzle, and that pressure moves inside this hollow jacket here, and it builds up. Once the projectile leaves the barrel, that excess pressure inside here diverts back out through those pinholes, and it actually creates a vacuum that draws lingering gas out of the barrel. So another point is that most modern tanks have some form of auto ejection. Without this, you have a dramatic increase of backdraft and fumes going inside the tank, which can be harmful to the crew. One of the capabilities or features of these tanks is the lighting system. They have several functions that serve several purposes. So basically, starting from the top, this light right here is a full beam white light, and it has a screen on it that provides what we call blackout lighting. So the difference between the two is, let's say you're just doing an administration move down a road during training or in a no threat environment. The driver can actually drive opened up out of the driver's hole, and he can put on full beam white light, and like just driving a car at night. Secondary to that is he has what's called his blackout light. So typically on most military vehicles, it will be a full white light that has a screen over it. the screen blacks out almost all of that light, and it turns it into like a dim, very dim yellow color. And as you can see with the blackout light here, it is designed to only illuminate basically the edges of the tank and not more than a meter or so in front. And this is so that during a condition when you may not be using night vision capability, or you might need to be have a ground guide aiding you through close country, this serves a purpose just so that the driver can see obstacles that might be immediately in front of him, and the light itself can't be spotted from an enemy without night vision capability from quite a distance away. So in other words, if you're driving with blackout lights, by the time you may be seen by the enemy, he's going to see a lot of the rest of the tank before he spots that light itself. So it is not a direct beam. Moving away from that, this light over here is what we call an IR light. Again, it's basically a normal light that has an infrared capable bulb or globe, and then it is the lens is actually fully screened with a black coating. And this is an invisible light to the human eye, but it aids with for those of you that are not familiar with night vision capability, in order for night vision to work, you actually need an ambient light, for example moonlight or starlight, on a more darker night or in very, very close terrain where you might not have that good natural light. You can put on your IR light and provide that natural light that the night vision needs to function. So this is the driver's IR light here. And then a lot of the other upgrades of T-55, T-62 and more modern tanks, they have IR lighting capability for the main gun, the crew commander, the back of the tank. So yeah.
So this is the IR light.
Yeah.
Right.
I have an idea for this, so we'll do this again in a minute. All right. So the final function of the lighting system is what we call marker lights. On these tanks, they're these small lights with a small white cover, and the purpose that serves is when the tank is moving around. It's a very dim light that basically it allows other tanks, or maybe someone on the ground who might be guiding the tank, it allows them just to see where the front points of the tank is, where the side is. These lights are also featured around on the back side of the tank and up on the turret, and it's simply a marker light. So briefly, I'm going to touch on this section of metal here. This is what we call a Trimvane. It is removable, and it has a section here cut out for the lighting. The purpose of this is when the tank begins waterfording or moving through creeks, rivers, that sort of thing. Once the nose dives below the water level, you actually create a big bow wave, and the bow wave wants to move up over the front of the tank. The idea of the Trimvane is to prevent that bow wave and disperse it off to the side and stop the majority of that water heading right up into the driver's face and right through the hatch, blocking periscopes and causing problems. It is removable. I do know that from driving this, when you do remove this, naturally out in a dusty environment, the wind and the dust will actually move right up the front of the tank and right into the driver's face. So this also helps in helping the dust reflect straight up and stop the driver just eating dust completely while he's driving. So that's what the purpose of that serves. Okay, so we're just going to talk now about the additional foliage or camouflage that you see here, and why that's there and how that might work. Basically, when you apply your principles of camouflage, one of the main considerations is shape and surface. So just having a camouflage paint or camouflage color does not complete the full circle of what you need to provide good camouflage. The brush here helps to separate those natural straight lines and silhouettes that might appear. So, straight lines and right angles don't appear naturally in nature. In order to break up the shape of the tank, the crews would have added camouflage like this. Okay, so there it is, just a quick general overview. Once more, this is a T-55 AMS, Polish Army. This particular one is built under license in Poland, and to the best of our knowledge, tracking the serial number, this is actually the second to last T-55 Poland ever actually produced. So yeah, this tank is part of the collection here at Battlefield Vegas. It does run, it drives excellent, very good condition. And one day soon, when we find the parts we need, we have to make this gun a live shooting tank. So come by and have a look.